Okay, hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar where we will discuss the new changes to the tax laws affecting debt issuance in Italy. My name is Harry Rowe. I'm an investor communications expert at AccuPay. My background is in mathematics. I studied for a PhD in applied maths, and I also worked in communications before joining AccuPay. The political, legal and financial landscape across Europe is changing rapidly. In the near future, we expect that these changes will include reduction and phase-out of issuances into foreign markets using SPVs. The categorizations of domestic and international instruments will become more blurry, at least from a mechanics perspective. Bearer bonds will be more or less killed off by the tax agencies. Issuers will have entry points through the ICSDs into a network of clearing systems around the world. Finally, we expect that at some point in the future, we will see Eurobonds being issued by a collective Eurozone vehicle of some description. These will be delivered via a new Europe-wide settlement system called T2S, which our partners from Unlisted Italy will describe in more detail. Today, we'll be hearing from Bob Apfel, founder and CEO of AccuPay. We'll have Luca Tilano from Unlisted Italy, who we've worked with since 2010. Importantly, we'll have the perspective from the buy side as well. We have Eric Brown, who's the Senior VP of Tax at PIMCO. And we will also be hearing from some of the most respected lawyers in the field of Italian tax or debt capital markets. Over to you, Bob.
Well, thank you, Harry. First, I'm going to quickly recap who is AccuPay. We were founded in 2005, and since then, the firm has grown to be responsible for over €1 trillion of debt and quasi-debt instruments. The business of AccuPay is quite simple. It helps cross-border investors to clear the hurdles created by government tax agencies which occur when principal or interest crosses national frontiers. As you know, tax agencies cross the border. Frankly, investors generally have no problem reporting their income to their own country's tax agency. However, dealing with foreign tax agencies is often problematic. AccuPay helps to clear this hurdle away by sending to the tax agency in the issuer's country the tax information which is required by law or regulation. Generally, the issuer's country wants to know who is the investor, and they want proof that the investor is not resident in their country. So we collect up this data from and send it to tax agencies in the issuer countries from we collected at the moment from 609 Euroclear participant accounts, 311 Clearstream participant accounts, and about 1,200 participant accounts of DTC, the U.S. clearing system, and other clearing agencies, including CDS in Canada, AustroClear, the Korean and Italian systems, in fact, right here with Monte Italy. The first transaction the firm did was a $4 billion FRN for Banco Santander. That was back in 2005. The first deals here in Italy were for a big Italian financial, and later the same year in 2010, a big corporate. Interestingly, the Santander deal was so well thought of by the world's markets that tax, and tax alone, was driving a deal into the market that it won the IFR award as the best 2005 senior debt deal in the financial sector. In red, we note that the lead managers, Deutsche and Lehman, were of the view that it was tax and tax alone that was necessary for the deal to get into the market. Now, sadly, the AccuPay engineering and design was based on, unfortunately, a horrible international tragedy. The 9/11 World Trade Center attacks brought in new anti-money laundering laws in many countries, which for the first time required financial institutions to take KYC responsibility, that's know your customer responsibility, on an affirmative basis They had to actually test that these were their clients, call them at home, literally. In fact, in the U.S., under the Patriot Act, they still have to call their investors twice a year to make sure that the phone numbers are correct. Sadly, without this 9/11 situation happening, we would be unable to operate the AccuPay system today. Italy would be unable to access the Yankee market, the RMB market, you name it. The legislative decree 239 approach wouldn't work because after 9/11, and in fact by the end of 2002, all of the banks in the OECD countries were now functioning, were required to function as official gathering points holding vetted, proved client data. With this in place, we were able to create a new paradigm for tax compliance. So we created the system, rolled it out in 2005, which among other things required that the participants of the clearing systems must register with the system, and as registrants, they have to agree to take responsibility for the KYC data that they maintain and that they transmit. I want to point out, though, that the use of the system is entirely voluntary. No bank or broker has to use it, but clearly tax compliance is necessary, and if data isn't entered, the customers lose that exemption. Now, the AccuPay system translates into the terms of each market, whether the investors be in the U.S., in Canada, Japan, wherever. They translate the Italian principles into the principles of those local markets. And this is very important because what Italy calls, for example, an institutional investor isn't what Americans consider an institutional investor. So once the custodian in the local market identifies where the client is or where the institution is, the system swings into use. The system then produces all the necessary tax documentation for the investors, and fortunately, the Italian tax environment is extremely well designed on a mechanical level. Among other things, it says that investor certifications live forever. They're evergreen, and they can be referenced for each investor. They can be set up just once and referenced for the life of the investor's involvement in the marketplace. Finally, the system transmits all of the data that's necessary to meet the requirements of the tax agencies. It transmits that via Monte Titoli, which functions as the second-level bank in this arrangement, onto the tax agency. Now, on the subject of Monte Titoli, I want to stop now and turn the microphone over to Luca Solano in Milan, who's going to give us a brief overview of Monte Titoli, especially, and as well talk about T2S, which is the big new item in the agenda.
Okay, thanks, Bob. I will show you a short overview of what Monte Titoli does as activity, what we will do in the future to challenge the new scenario in T2S. First of all, Monte Titoli was created in 1978 as the group and finally part of the London Stock Exchange Group in 2007. Monte Titoli is a CSD covers a full range of services, including custody and settlement and all ancillary services, including trading routing, securities lending, and collateral management. Nevertheless, Monte Titoli growth during the history in its client bases, covering an international customer base of more than 400 banks, brokers, and many investors, CSDs, and central counterparties connected to our system in order to make use of our service to be elected into the Italian markets. Nevertheless, Monte Titoli has a specific and durable relationship with issuing companies. We open issuing accounts in our system. We have a relationship directly with more than 200. Took the opportunity, together with Bob and AccuPay, to develop a tax service for Italian issuers who wish to issue abroad in the most relevant international markets, so that we projected and developed our tax service to allow issuers to create issue plan abroad and allow the final investor to be tax exempt by means of the joint work of AccuPay and Monte Titoli. This is a slide showing the asset under custody of Monte Titoli. The most relevant details is to show that Monte Titoli is the third CSD all over Europe, basing on the volumes of the asset under custody with reference to equities, corporate and government bonds. This is a first introduction to T2S. T2S will be the new unique platform for settlement at European level. Settlement will become a commodity, so CSDs are connected to develop pre-settlement and settlement services in order to route their participants into T2S system, to challenge the new scenario of European global custodian, to develop new services, and to improve the client basis. Monte Titoli will be one of the pioneers in this challenge, as we signed the framework agreement to enter into the first wave, which will go live in 2015. This is a summary saying what will happen with T2S. We are moving from a prospected environment regulated by domestic laws, regulated by domestic competitors and systems, to a new European system where custodians and CSD will take the lead on the basis of efficiency, portfolio services and economy of scale in offering services to their participants, either on a domestic or on an international basis. According to this, I can tell you which will be the strategy Monte Titoli will adopt. We are trying to expand our knowledge, our portfolio services, to be ready to compete in a single European market, to offer a comprehensive package from clearing to settlement services to all our participants, and in order to attract new participants, we are trying to complete our portfolio, also including a relevant issue, which is tax services on the most relevant securities traded in the European IT securities. This is just a definition. Monte Titoli is glad to take note that Jean-Michel Godefroy, the chairman of the T2S program board into the Central European Bank, is glad that Monte Titoli decided to join the first wave in T2S, and trust in Monte Titoli as one of the earliest CSD in joining the new settlement system and supporting since the beginning the European Central Bank. Okay, I think this is the end of the Monte Titoli presentation.
Well, thank you very, very much, Luca. And I look forward to leaving the rain of London and seeing the sun in Milan. On that subject, I'm going to now explain about the mechanics of these new laws and how Monte Titoli and AccuPay react to them. But in order to explain this, I think I've got to explain first, for a lot of the non-mechanics on the line here, just how securities are issued. And in order to do that, I need to turn the clock back to the year 1963, 49 years ago. That year, John Kennedy was in the White House, in fact, in the summer of 63. He just had a couple months more to live. In Italy, films by Fellini and Visconti were catching the attention of a worldwide audience, and the two men on the right, whose pictures you see there, created the bond issuance format that's been used by the majority of big Italian issuers for the last several years. The bond issuance format that they created came to be called the Eurobond, and now they're now calling it the international bond. The international bond, or Eurobond then and now, is a bond that's been issued outside of the issuer's country, or the country where the currency of the bond is normally employed. And the two men you see on the right, Sigmund Warburg was the founder of S.G. Warburg, which, as you know, was ultimately sold off into the hands of UBS, and Edmund Israel, who just died a year or two ago, who was the manager of the back office at Banque Internationale at Luxembourg, and was the founder of Sidel and as well the chairman of the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. He just died very recently, and I knew him actually personally. These two men are responsible for creating 250,000 financial jobs today in London and Dublin, 20,000 financial jobs in Luxembourg, and 4,000 jobs in Belgium. But I'm going to bet that the majority of the people on this phone don't know the name of the ultimate borrower whose money was employed for that who received the funding on that first deal. I know who you're thinking of, but no, it was Finsider. They were the Italian steel company, which was part of the IRI group. I know I'm pronouncing it wrong. I understand it was set up by Mussolini. It was Finsider, a steel company that needed financing, but in order to get that financing, they had to solve a batch of problems. Now, why did they explore this new market? Answer, following the Marshall Plan that followed World War II, by 1963, there were an awful lot of spare U.S. dollars in Europe that needed to be invested. The dollars in people's hands, like this Belgian dentist there in Brussels. However, there were these problems. Almost all of them had to do with tax. So Warburg and Israel created ingenious solutions to these problems, which you can see from the lower left, were Italian withholding tax on the interest payments, 4% stamp duty at issue in the UK, 4% continuing stamp duty, 70% income tax that the Belgian investor might have been paying at that point, UK income tax that UK investors were paying, and lastly, this problem about the Luxembourg Stock Exchange quoting in sterling. Now, I'm going to go through the solutions because you're going to see in a few minutes that the bonds you're using today were created to solve these problems. First, they tackled the problem of Italian withholding tax on the interest payments that would have to be withheld by the issuer. Finsider would have had to have withheld income taxes on the interest that it was paying, but Autostrada didn't. They had an exemption under the Italian law, and so as a result, the bond proceeds that came in went into Finsider via Autostrada. Then all the bonds were issued in bearer form, and this was very important because there was no mechanism in place to determine who the investors were. And finally, all of the coupons were paid by BIL, the paying agent and custodian of the bonds, there in Luxembourg. And frankly, Luxembourg didn't know who investors were. Second, they had a UK stamp duty to deal with. Now, stamp is not tax, as my friends at HMRC tell me. It's a duty. It's over 400 years old. The American Revolution was based on stamp. You remember, we were dumping the Queen's tea or the King's tea overboard because we didn't want to put stamps on the tea. There was a 4% stamp that had to be purchased every time a security traded hands in London. And S.G. Warburg didn't want that 4% tax to be taken out of the underwriting discount or fee being charged. So the deal had to close outside of, the deal had to not close, the deal had to be done outside of the UK. It took place there at Schiphol Airport. This eliminated the 4% stamp duty at issuance. Next, we had the continuing stamp duty on the trading. The dealers in London were going to make secondary markets in the bonds. The problem, though, was if the investors were in Belgium, the dealers were in the UK, every time the bonds went in and out of the UK, ka-ching, there was another 4% stamp duty that had to be applied. How to eliminate that stamp duty? Simple. Keep all the bonds here at BIL as custodian in Luxembourg, although the trading might go on via telephone, because the bonds never moved, and further because stamp duty was a duty for never setting foot in the UK, they solved the trading stamp duty problem. Now, fourth, they had to deal with the problem of income taxes by the investors, whether this Belgian dentist or even an American investor. Believe it or not, at that time, there was a tax on Americans exporting their capital abroad. There were these taxes that had to be collected in the investor's own market. So Belgium would have been looking for taxes from this man, and at 70%, he'd rather die than pay them. So how to avoid those taxes? Again, it's that bearer bond that doesn't take an interest in such matters. and the problem disappears. In fact, in the literature of these bonds, they described a famous coupon train once a year where the Belgian investors would get on the 4-hour train and go chugging into Luxembourg, clip their coupons, get their cash, and return. Now, we don't very much longer have these coupon trains, except, I guess, those flights you see, chock-a-block full of elegant people arriving in Miriam's hometown, which is Geneva. Fifth, they legally eliminated income taxes on the UK retail investors. In the UK, there was an income tax that had to be paid by UK individuals. However, that tax was totally waived if the bonds were listed on an exchange. But there is one big problem with listing them on the London Stock Exchange, and that was that the London Stock Exchange thought that the world revolved around sterling. At that time, all the quotations in London, when you bid or offered securities, you had to offer them or bid for them in sterling. When you settled them, you had to settle them in sterling, and the prices that were reported in the papers were in sterling. And the sterling rate, the exchange rate, was set historically, not current. So the entire thing was sort of understood by the London local market. Try to bring in a worldwide market into this crazy, lunatic, sterling-centric world, and it would be a disaster. So Warburg in Israel went off to Luxembourg's bourse. It was a small bourse. It was open only 1 hour a day. It had only 139 issues listed back then. And they said, please list this, don't get involved, don't ask any questions, don't even trade it, just list it, because it'll make some people happy. Well, that idea took off. Today, there are over 29,100 bonds and over 4,000 CCAVs listed in the London Exchange. So to recap then, the instrument that they created back then, this Eurobond, which is now being called the International Bond, was originally designed to permit issuers to sell their bonds to what we might have called foreign investors. Were they all foreign? Probably not. There were probably a batch of people that weren't foreign, but we'll call them foreigners. And they were holding this local currency and wanting to invest it outside of the country where that currency is naturally taking place. But Italian tax officials, and furthermore, there was never any reporting on who owned the bonds, who bought them. It was all a bunch of bearer bonds sitting in some vaults in Luxembourg. So the Italian tax, 49 years later today, has always been troubled by this anonymous, secretive, international bond mechanic. It drove them absolutely crazy. So, until recently then, the problem though was, although it drove them crazy, they never reacted. They didn't provide the market with an alternative. So the market was naturally led to keep using this Eurobond mechanic, this secretive bearer global technique or whatever, because it was the only way they could tap investments from legitimate foreign investors. But now it would appear that Italy has finally taken the wraps off of a system that will permit legitimate foreign investors who are really foreign and really compliant both in Italy and in their home market, not hiding taxes from anyone, to freely buy Italian bonds. But in order to do that, we needed a system that would cover all instruments, short, long, hybrid, whatever, and it would need to provide them with access into all markets and all currencies. You might say that Italian issuers wanted universal access to all markets. So in order to achieve this, they needed to roll out a system, which the lawyers will tell us more about a little bit later, that basically provide access to all types of investors so long as they're in whitelist countries. It's provided for virtually all types of securities instruments, ranging from long to short to hybrid, and permitted all investor types to participate. And in order to participate, all these investors would have to do is to keep their securities through an Italian second-level bank, in essence a bank that signs a contract with the Italian government saying, we'll keep you informed of what's happening here. The investor identities had to be confirmed by a bank which employed these modern KYC principles, but sadly, because of that 9/11 World Trade Center, we've got that one handled handily. And further, we had to make sure that each investor was documented and that if issuers continued to go around the horn to bring in the money via the SPV, they set up a sensible regime at a much lower tax rate, but with an upfront guarantee fee. So now let's view this new world that the Italian tax agency has laid out and describe how it will work in practice. Now first, this first of 3 slides, I'm going to show you basically 3 slides, or 3 approaches. This approach is what we might call indirect issuance via an affiliate. Here, the Italian obligor borrows money from an Irish issuer, which is merely acting as a pass-through. And that Irish issuer is going to issue a global note, which will be put on deposit with a common depository for Euroclear and Clearstream. There'll be a paying agent appointed, which will normally be the same bank as the common depository. Now, because this Irish issuer is essentially just doing this for its Italian affiliate, there'll be this 0.25% one-time guarantee fee on the total amount of P&I payable, plus there'll be a 5% annual withholding tax that will need to be netted out of these payments before they flow down and all the way up in through Euroclear and Clearstream and the various other clearing systems that might be participants or members in them. It's fine if you enjoy getting your income minus 5%, and it's fine if you're okay with that 0.25% fee, which is a lot better than what we had before. The next approach, then, is what we might call not indirect, but rather direct issuance. This is what we might call direct issuance, but using the Eurobond mechanics. The Eurobond mechanics, again, where the Italian issuer, as we can see, it issues its securities, again, through the same approach of putting a global note on deposit with Euroclear and Clearstream, which then Euroclear and Clearstream then credit the accounts of their participants, including one of their participants is Monte which in turn then credit the accounts of Monte participants. This really should be a 2-sided arrow because Euroclear and Clearstream, it all begins with their common depository. They're holding it for their participants. They're holding it, they're reporting on information to the tax agency. There's one thing that's missing, though, which is any other market outside of this little world. Euroclear and Clearstream, as we can see, can't pass along these deals into the RMB market, the Samurai market, the Yankee market, or forget about the Yankee or Samurai. What if you had one global market? What if you just wanted to reach an Italian, you wanted to reach an investor in Japan that just didn't maintain a custody account at Euroclear and Clearstream? How could that Japanese investor buy into this deal? And the answer is they can't, because these entities over here don't operate a system that works for extending this to the rest of the world. And now then we move into what we might then call universal issuance, which is universal issuance is frankly what we saw on the recent Intesa and Eni issues, and what I think we're going to be seeing an awful lot more of. In fact, I think we're going to be seeing it universally in the future because it provides universal access to Legislative Decree 239 in the U.S., certainly in Japan with the Samurai market, with RMB, with kangaroo bonds, Canadian bonds, even in Austria, and in fact here this is, maybe I'm going to stop here in Austria, and I'll simply mention that Austria is a clearing system that today has a direct account with Monte Titoli, but the Austrian clearing system does not know how to record keep securities following the principles of Legislative Decree 239. That's where there's a need to introduce a system to collect up the tax information and the documentation via Monte Titoli, where Monte Titoli then supports its participants who are other clearing systems to make it possible for Legislative Decree 239 to operate in those markets. And as you can see, upon issuance, there's two notes that are created, an X note and an N note, one that's exempt and the other that's not exempt, and they're issued and delivered to the various clearing systems external to Monte-Titoli. But for clearing systems that do have Italian record-keeping and accounting systems, Monte-Titoli delivers only the gross note, and Monte-Titoli delivers only the gross note to its participants. Just returning to where we started in the U.S., if those of you that want to pick up the offering documents for the Intesa or the Eni documents, you'll see that those deals had two notes that were created, one gross, one net, but there was no direct link, as there was for Austria, to Monte-Titoli. There's no direct link between DTC today and Monte-Titoli. Call this American chauvinism, call it whatever you like, there's no direct link, sadly. One day there will be. The Austrians are wiser than the Americans, I think, in this regard. But to make that link between Monte-Titoli and the U.S. clearing system, no problem. We just did in bonds what equity issuers have been doing for decades. What do? Deposit receipts. That's how you connect up two disparate markets. You interpose a receipt issuer, and man, you're flying. And in fact, you can fly all over the damn world, no problem. And in fact, this is the reason why I believe that the format that we've seen before, that I think we're going to be calling universal issuance, I believe that this is going to be the issuance format of the future, letting the work that's been done since 2010 morph into the sensible approach, an approach that allows you to access the Euroclear and Clearstream worlds, the direct participants of Monte-Titoli, and all of the other clearing systems in the world, and all of their participants, giving you access globally. Now I'll turn it back to Harry. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Now, of course, none of this is really of any use unless someone is willing to buy these securities. And it's really important that we hear from the buy side directly on this subject. We are delighted to have on the phone with us today the world's largest buyer of securities, PIMCO, the Pacific Investment Management Company, who are based in Newport Beach in California. And from PIMCO, I'm delighted to welcome Eric Brown, who's the Senior Vice President of Tax at PIMCO. I understand Eric has been involved at a very senior level in the some of the tax matters that are being discussed today. Eric, thank you for joining us.
Sure.
Eric, to start us off, can you explain briefly your role at PIMCO and what exactly you do?
Sure. I manage the tax department here for PIMCO, and we essentially manage all of the tax matters for PIMCO on a global basis. All of our tax resources are based here in Newport Beach in California for our entire global business. So we manage anything tax related for the firm.
Okay, that's good. So can I ask you, assuming that an issuer can no longer issue their debt through a tax-free SPV and has to issue in compliance with local law, can you go through what steps would PIMCO follow before deciding on whether to invest or not?
Sure. I mean, I think clearly the key investment decision is made by the portfolio managers in terms of really analyzing the trade from a true investment perspective. Where we get involved on the tax side is once the portfolio manager has decided that they like the particular trade, then tax becomes a key determinant in whether or not we make the trade. So what we've seen on these particular Italian deals is that once the portfolio managers have made the first decision, they would come to us and ask us to confirm whether or not there are any tax ramifications that would impact their analysis of the trade. So what we've been, for us, the real key is the ability to get good information quickly. And that's always been the case. And when we saw some of the Intesa deals come to the market and some of the other Italian deals that were, somewhat new and different. The initial struggles were really around the ability to get good information and be able to analyze the particular issues and what the tax ramifications were, not only for, say, a U.S. investor, but really every investor around the globe. Because when our portfolio managers decide that they, like a particular deal, we essentially have customer accounts in almost every country of the world, and so the ability to get information quickly, the ability to distill that information into a decision quickly, and not only for one or two jurisdictions, but really a large number of jurisdictions is really what is key for us, and has at times caused us problems because we haven't been able to get that information as quickly at times as we would like.
Okay, that's very interesting. Can I ask you further? So specifically on the big LD239 Italian deals sold thus far, such as Intesa, for example, where investors who are not in compliance from a tax perspective get their bonds essentially put in the doghouse and taxed on resale. It seems to me there has been good coordination and data flows between PIMCO and AccuPay that's prevented any unwarranted problems from occurring. I mean, would you agree with that? And do you have any suggestions that you'd like to see going forward on that subject?
Yeah, I think we had a very good experience with, and continue to have a good relationship with AccuPay on these issues. I think for us, when the first Intesa type deals started to come out with these frozen QSIPs or these particular locked up QSIPs, that was something new to us, and it took a little time to sort of fully understand how that worked and what the issues were. And like I said at the my initial comment was it's really about getting the ability to get information quickly and act on it quickly, because the trade flow moves very fast, and the portfolio managers make decisions quickly, and they want to move quickly once that decision is made. And so some of the I guess the pains that we felt early on was the difficulty we had in really confirming whether our individual client accounts could hold a particular QSIP. And we have so many jurisdictions in play that the ability to quickly understand whether or not those particular investors could hold these special types of Italian issues was key. And I think to this day the struggle still continues on our side, really, with the interaction with our individual clients, custodian banks. We would like to assume if a particular client is in a country that's a whitelisted country or seemingly an eligible type client, that the custodian bank will do what's necessary to certify the account and make sure everything goes smoothly. Unfortunately, we've had instances where that hasn't been the case, and so our portfolio managers want us to make sure on the front end that we know a custodian is going to certify an account correctly, and that no issues will occur, and that the QSIPs will not be frozen. And so that puts some pressure on the timeline to be able to reach out to dozens of different custodians, some of which are easier to get a hold of than others, and confirm that the accounts will be certified. And AccuPay, as this was sort of a new event for us a year or two ago, and we realized that AccuPay really had good information and was able to provide us a lot of data and get us to the right contacts at the various custodians. We started to work very closely with them, and it turned out to be a very good relationship where we were able to provide some information to AccuPay. AccuPay was able to provide us with information, and eventually sort of reconcile the two and get to the right answer. We have had a few instances where it didn't work out so well, not because of AccuPay or anything. It was more a custodian bank communication issue, but I think it has worked very well, and I think looking forward, What will continue to improve the process, I think, is really just improving the data flow within the market system on this sort of information, and if there's ways to make it easier for the asset managers to connect with the custodian banks and other participants that are in that data flow between the issuer and the ultimate client owner, would really help us be able to make our decisions faster and make sure that we can process the trade as quickly as possible and get it in place and not have to be too concerned about ultimately the bond or the account not being certified by the custodian and then having to go through some of the other difficulties with frozen CUSIPs and the like. So to me, I think everything's going in the right direction, and I think AccuPay is definitely providing some very good service in that regard. I would just say generally whatever improvements can be made to further simplify the process, the data flow, the ability to get to the information quickly, and whether it's through publicly available data warehouses, systems where we can easily search documents, search for CUSIPs, search for client certifications, whatever it might be. Those would be the types of things I think would continue to improve the process.
Okay, I mean, thank you very much. That's really interesting. I think I speak for everyone. That's certainly some very interesting suggestions there. Okay, let's move on. So now we're very pleased to have with us on the phone some of the most important and respected Italian securities and tax lawyers who we've asked to share with us their analysis of these remarkable changes in law. Now, I'd like to first turn to Clifford Chance. So we have with us Carlo Galli and Franco Grilli. Gentlemen, if you can give us a starting point, can you provide us with an overview of the actual law decree changes that were made and what they were, if possible, in chronological order?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. This is Carlo Galli. I'm the head of tax at Clifford Chance in Italy, and we have been working together with AccuPay since 2006 in trying to overcome the hurdles posed by Italian tax legislation in opening up markets. And we finally succeeded in connection with the two major deals that Bob mentioned before and which we did together. We are now facing a new wave of tax changes in Italy. Since the wave started in July of last year, when the Italian government introduced a new tax regime for the issuance through foreign SPV by Italian company, that briefly was alluded to by Bob earlier on, and that contemplates a 5% withholding tax on Italian source interest on shareholders' loan between the foreign SPV and the Italian ultimate borrower, and a 25 bips stamp duty on the guarantee that would normally be extended on the bonds issued by the foreign SPV. This new piece of legislation came in at a time when there was a real need for non-listed Italian issuers to gather funds through alternative sources to bank financing. And this could be a solution that could be used by all Italian issuers, but was particularly beneficial for non-listed issuers, even though it was somewhat cumbersome, costly, and complex. Unfortunately, however, this came at a time when the international capital markets were not very open to receive new issuance from Italy, and so that this new set of rules was ultimately applied in a handful of cases maximum. Shortly thereafter, mid-August of 2011, a major overhaul of the Italian system for the taxation of income from financial sources, including interest and other income on bonds, was introduced with effective date 1st of January 2012. This new regime, when we look at bonds on issued by Italian issuers introduced basically two changes. One, it raised the basic rate from 12.5% to 20%, but this has no effect on non-resident investors established in whitelisted jurisdictions, because those will be receiving interest gross subject to some de minimis compliance. And widened this particularly favorable regime also to bonds having a maturity shorter than 18 months that were formerly heavily penalized by a very detrimental tax regime. Then we come to the end of June of this year, when the growth decree was approved and published by the Italian government. And the growth decree in the domain of tax on bonds, leaving aside project bonds for a second, does mainly three things. On the one hand, it equalizes the tax treatment of the Italian version of commercial paper to that of bonds, thus opening up a interesting channel of financing for short-term securities for Italian issuers. Secondly, in the case of certain bonds issued by non-listed issuers, it removes one of the major hurdles that were in existence before, which was the limit to the deduction of the interest expenses, thus now bringing the deduction of interest on non-listed bonds in line with that of interest of bonds issued by banks and listed companies, so subject only to the general limitation. Thirdly, it equalizes the withholding and substitute tax regime of interest on bonds, on certain bonds issued by Italian issuers, Italian non-listed issuers, to that of bonds issued by listed issuers and banks that I just described, and that and with which the market is now very familiar with. Unfortunately, the relevant provisions were not very well written, and they remain some inconsistency that lend themselves to ambiguities that will hopefully be cleared and eliminated going forward, either through change in law or through interpretation. All in all, this is a great innovation in the Italian taxation system of bonds, and is able to widen opportunities for issues. In particular, whilst the lifting of the limitation of the interest deduction applies to bonds underwritten by institutional investors, the equalization of taxation at source applies only to bonds that are listed. So apparently you might have a bond which is not enjoying the more favorable taxation regime at source, but yielding interest that doesn't suffer limitation on the deduction, or conversely a bond that while suffering a limitation on the deduction has a very favorable taxation at source. Both cases would be very penalizing and would most likely not fly. So this is in a nutshell, and leaving aside also subordinated issuance at this stage, what the new legislation does in the domain of tax. That my colleagues from the other firms will add other details. In the meanwhile, I will hand it over to Franco to briefly illustrate the changes in the legal domain.
Thank you very much, Carlo. My name is Franco Grilli. I'm a partner in Clifford Chance, Milan, on the capital market area. I was lucky enough to work on the first direct Eurobond by an Italian corporate back when the first version of the Decree 239 of 96 was enacted. And I remember that at that time, even with many limitations, that was perceived as a revolutionary framework that truly opened the market to Italian corporates. And I believe we are now in a similar scenario through the various reforms that have been enacted on the tax side and on the corporate law side with respect to bond issuance by Italian corporates. In general, corporate law changes on bond issuances have been driven during the last decade by a reaction by the legislator to events more or less extraordinary. For instance, we had, and without going back in the history as far as Bob did before, I remember the defaults by Parmalat and Cirio bonds led to an increase of the standards to access the capital markets by Italian corporates. More recently, we have experienced a new set of rules on liability management, whereby, because increased market volatility and illiquidity made necessary to intervene on outstanding bonds before they reached their natural maturity, Italy was one of the excluded countries from certain tender and exchange offers, as well as consent solicitation exercises, because the legislation was not ready and was not aligned to European standards. Likewise, the current credit crunch and market crisis has created an increased need by Italian corporates to access capital markets, and that's the spirit of this reform from a legal point of view. It's not a case that the reforms on that area are included within a law that is headed urgent measures for the growth of the country. This law is technically a law decree, and it's law decree number 83 of 22 June 2012. It is an act of the government rather than the parliament, and you should take into account that it entered into force on the date of its publication on the 26th of June, and you have to bear in mind that still needs a formal, although it is already a law in force, but it needs to be converted into a parliamentary law within 60 days from its entry into force. Otherwise, if it's not converted, it will retroactively lose force and effect. Now, because it is within a very wide range of measures for the growth of the country, the reforms we are talking about are contained in Article 32 of Law Decree number 83, out of 70 articles in total. Nonetheless, this article contains not only the tax changes that Carlo described, but also legal changes, and conceptually these changes in corporate law and legislative legal framework do not constitute an absolute liberalization of bond issuances by corporate issuers, but rather a facilitated access to the capital markets upon certain conditions. So there are certain conditions to have any corporate issuing bonds and placing bonds. Now, in a nutshell, the key aspects of the reforms are: one, no more share capital limitation to the size of bond issuances by Italian issuers. Two, new possibility for unlisted corporates to issue bonds. Three, new rules on short-term instruments. And four, new rules on subordinated instruments. There are certain details which I don't think it's opportune to treat here, but you should bear in mind that what I'm going to describe is just the essence of the legal provisions enacted. There are, as I said, certain conditions, there are certain details. which I'm not going to touch for the sake of time. Now, the first item, no more share capital limitation. The Article 2412 of the Italian Civil Code, which contains certain limitation in terms of existing share capital for issuers in order to determine what is the size of bonds that may be issued, is now being removed upon condition that the bonds are listed in a regulated market or in a multilateral trading facility. And this is an absolute concept, and it's regardless of the nature of the issuer. On the second aspect, new possibility for unlisted corporates to issue bonds, even unlisted corporates, and regardless of their size, aside from micro companies, of course, may issue bonds at certain conditions. And we're talking about newcomers that did not have any instruments issued or listed in a regulated market or in a multilateral trading facility before. The conditions are essentially the use of a sponsor. The sponsor is essentially a market maker. The existence of the last balance sheet of the issuer that has to be audited, and the securities must be placed and subscribed only by qualified investors and must circulate in the secondary market only among qualified investors. Qualified investors, since 2 days now, it's a uniform and a universal definition which crosses areas such as MiFID and Prospectus Directive and Transparency Directive, so that will be common and on a European level and on a national level. There are certain exemptions. There are certain particulars that are not.
I'm terribly sorry to interrupt. We do have quite a sort of wide variety of subjects to cover. Can I ask you just to briefly wrap it up, and perhaps we can come back to this at the end, if that's all right?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Yeah, sorry, Franco. We have a lot of subjects to cover. Is there any chance we could move this forward a little bit and perhaps come back to some of the final points at the end?
Okay, no problem.
Okay, brilliant. All right. Well, thank you very much, Carlo and Franco. And as I say, perhaps we'll come back at the end to the final, the other points you were mentioning. If I can, I'd like to turn to, we have Allen and Overy as well with us, and White and Case, who have been involved in the drafting of the new decree laws themselves. So we have Paolo Liocani and Francesca Guelfi from Allen and Overy, and we have Michael Imordino and Ferigo Foscari from White and Case. So if I can start by asking why the recent reform of the tax treatment for Italian corporate bonds? How does this fit in with the current economy and the economic plans for Italy? Do we have Paola? And
hello, that's Francesco Guelfi speaking. Well, basically, I would say that in a nutshell, and summarizing a lot the economic conditions of Italy, the idea is basically that due to a number of reasons, one of which is the new regulatory framework surrounding banks and impacting on the ability of banks to lend and imposing new constraints into the lending activity. One of the expectations that we may have in relation to the future of capital markets is that there will be a sort of decrease in loans made directly by banks to corporate, and a corresponding increase in the need of borrowing by these entities. And this creates an opportunity for capital market transactions and for the issuance of bonds and similar instruments. In this respect, the decree gives a lot benefit, I would say, to the economy in general and to the economy of Italy of corporate in particular, because basically all those entities being unlisted in any regulated market and not being financial institutions were before the decree affected by a number of constraints, jeopardizing their ability to issue bonds and similar instruments on the market, and therefore jeopardizing their ability to raise funding with means different than bank lending and bank borrowing. And in this respect, this decree opens up a big window and constitutes a new instrument which is rather flexible, I would say, for unlisted entities to raise capital in a moment in which they will need capital for development purposes, hopefully, but they will also need to substitute capital in the medium-long term in order to refinance bank loans with some new means of funding. And this is basically what I think about the, I would say, the impact of this decree on the economy. But Michael, if you have something more on this one, especially about the ability of the decree to foster the economy and to produce development again.
Francesco, thank you. I mean, it's Michael Amordino from White Case. I'm the only non-Italian attorney in the mix here. But I guess what we could, there's not much to add other than to say that the restrictions, I think, on the withholding have obviously has had a serious impact on private companies issuing over the past 7 years, or actually maybe let's say 5 years in particular. And I believe, Francesco, you can correct me, but if I remember, it was in 2007 when many companies that had issued through SPV started having tax investigations brought against them.
Yeah.
So since then, you've had people trying to find systems. In the leverage context, people have been trying to focus on how to deal with this because this clearly is an increased cost in a transaction. And if you have to repatriate funds, you have a serious issue, and it's a cost to companies. And as a result, the attempt to try to change this and to create essentially a listed bond exemption, which is what this is, and bring Italy in parity with other countries that should, at the end of the day, lead more Italian companies to issue bonds. Clearly, you have an issue today where it's going to be very hard from a market point of view. We're working with a number of issuers right now, and it's obviously there's not a market out there. But we do believe that some of the issuers we're talking to today are getting ready to be in a position to take advantage of a window and issue. And I think this is both obviously because of the withholding, but also because of the 2412, what we call the corporate thin cap, that restriction no longer being there. It's our understanding that there still will be the tax restriction on the deductibility of interest that continues if that's the old thin cap rules. And Francesco, you could confirm that as well, because I believe that still applies. That's not exempted.
Yes.
So exactly. You can't overly leverage your company. So
okay,
I think,
so do you understand therefore, so would you say that the recent reform would would foster the issuance of corporate bonds then in that case?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, this is the idea, because having cancelled, if you want, repealed all the tax limits and corporate law limits that also Franco summarized, the idea is, of course, that corporate issuers can reach the debt capital markets easily. I think, as mentioned, we need to still work a little bit on this decree that will be converted into law in 60 days. Now, it would be at the beginning of September, because as also Michael said, right now you can avoid all the limits basically if you list the relevant securities on a regulated market or an MTF. But the idea is to try to work a little bit, again, on the decree as to make it possible to rely on all the relevant exemptions, if you want, or benefits if you address your offer only to qualified investors, which means that in the primary and secondary markets, these securities can go only to qualified investors. So, of course, we will need to work with the relevant clearing systems to make it sure that this will not cause any problems in the circulation of the securities. We have already some ideas on how to address this issue, and we have discussed a little bit with Michael, had the call, and Federico as well, of course. And we will share this view with this working group and also with the relevant authorities, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So to summarize, our view is the decree is very positive, and the corporate issuers can definitely reach more easily various markets, European markets, the US market. I will leave Michael to provide more details about it. But we'll need to work a little bit to make it possible to address the issues only to qualified investors and without having to list the securities, because sometimes it's not that easy, it's not really what the specific product would require or the market practice would require. I don't know, Michael, if you want to give a little bit more details on the US element here.
No, I mean, I'm on the U.S. element. It doesn't change that much. You know, when you take a look across the type of U.S. instruments, if there is a U.S. private placement, a private company will continue to have to implement 239, and they've been setting up deposit and custody agreements to do that. And with respect to a Yankee transaction, they will go through the process that was done in the original Intesa transaction that we worked on, and in that transaction, we relied upon the AccuPay system, taking the example, frankly, from the first Spanish deals that had implemented it. So that's how we would envision it going forward, of course.
Okay, I mean that's really interesting. Can I ask then, what do you see are the key obstacles that this reform actually removes from a tax and corporate perspective? I know you've covered some of that already, but perhaps you could elaborate just on those key obstacles that have been removed.
Yeah, well, starting from go ahead on the tax side. It's Federico speaking.
Okay. Thank you. Well, starting from the tax domain, I would say that the two most relevant obstacles that this decree is removing are the deductibility of interest paid under the bonds, because before the decree, a very old piece of legislation applied to unlisted issuers, and this old piece of legislation was basically saying that any time the overall cost with respect to interest, etc., relating to an issuance was exceeding certain thresholds, then the excess was not deductible in the hands of the issuer. And this was additive with respect to the ordinary deductibility limits, which are generally applicable to all corporate borrowers. And this, in a way, jeopardized a lot the possibility for the issuer to make an issuance which was, in a way, intelligent tax-wise, because in the end of the day, the thresholds were around, and I'm oversimplifying the matter, but just to give you the flavor of this, they were around 2 times that they were expressed as a yield. And the rule said that basically if I mean, all the part of the coupon which exceeded twice the reference interest issued by the BCE, the excess part of that coupon was not deductible. Now, since the reference rate is now 1%, twice is 2%, making a rough computation and a rough prediction, an unlisted corporate with good standing would issue at, say, 6.5%, which would end up in having 4.5% of interest not being deductible in the first place, and the remaining 2% being subject to the ordinary thin cap rules, which ordinarily apply to all corporates. And this was a big block to unlisted corporates to issue bonds. It must be said that last August, the August decree, one of the last issued by the previous government, intervened in this rule by providing that with ministerial decree, those limits, those thresholds, basically this 2%, could be modified and increased, but nothing happened until today. So this decree completely removes the obstacle by saying that these rules will not apply to the extent the bonds issued by an unlisted corporate entity in Italy are subscribed and basically circulate among professional investors, qualifying investors. And this is a good news because it removes a big obstacle. And we would just mention that this obstacle, the undeductibility of interest, was basically answering to the need of the tax authorities. I mean, it was an anti-abusive piece of legislation which was not formulated as an anti-avoidance rule, but it was formulated as general undeductibility. And we are happy that basically now this rule is not there anymore. The second one, very briefly, is that there has been I mean, bonds issued by unlisted corporate issuers right now may benefit from the 239 decree, provided that those bonds are listed on a regulated market, of course, and therefore have the issuer avail of the possibility not to apply the Italian withholdings on the interest payment any time those bonds are subscribed and I mean, circulating among investors which are resident in a whitelisted country. Which is good, but because before this rule was not applicable, of course, and therefore there was the general 20% Italian withholding on all the interest payments made to foreign investors, which could be limited under the treaties. But everybody knows that treaties are a little bit cumbersome to be applied, and also usually do not provide for full exemption except in limited cases, and provide just for a reduction on the withholding to 10%. And that's basically it on the tax side.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. Just before we go on, I am conscious we're running slightly over our time, so if I can ask the rest of our contributors to be as brief as possible. We next turn to Vanya Petrella, who's from Cleary Gottlieb Steen Hamilton. Vanya, if I can ask you, with the growth decree having eliminated the corporate restrictions to direct issuances, do you see any tax reason why an Italian non-listed company would have or would want to issue indirectly anymore?
Yeah, just picking up on what Francesco Guelfi has just illustrated to the group in terms of the major tax developments, and assuming that the deductibility of interest, so the interest expense allowance that he's illustrated, applies also to non-listed bonds, to listed bonds in addition to non-listed bonds, which seems to be the intention of the government, and that may be one of the tweaks or fixes that someone earlier alluded to. Really, there's not that many reasons now for Italian corporates to want to issue or have to issue indirectly. There are only two scenarios that I can think of that now could trigger some tax issues or additional tax cost in issuing directly and that would be either when the bonds are not listed, because as mentioned earlier, these bonds would not benefit from an exemption on withholding tax. And so, depending on the type of issuance that we're looking at, and assuming, that listing is not a too complex scenario, perhaps that's really not a situation that issuers will really be concerned with. The other situation is where, because of the way in which the mechanics of the current Italian system, there is no direct access to what everybody refers to Decree 239, which in effect means availability and access to the withholding tax exemption. However, we know that there have been at least two precedents that have been mentioned before in this call, both one for a financial institution and the other for a corporate, where these hurdles have been overcome with the help of AccuPay. And as a result, assuming that people are willing to go through that procedure, and of course of the hurdles of putting up that procedure, but of course there are precedents out there, there's really no immediate need for considering indirect issuance. However, one thing that it may be worthwhile mentioning is that the change that has been introduced with this decree in terms of enabling a non-listed company to deduct interest expense on what for tax reasons would be called a high yield bond, so a bond that bears an interest with the thresholds that Francesco mentioned before, could enable to get around some of the problems that the current CFC legislation generated for indirect structures. And so, in a way, while there are a number of things that have been fixed with these rules in order to enable Italian non-listed companies to issue directly, at the same time, and I don't think it was the direct objective of the rules, but they also fixed one of the problems that was generated by the CFC legislation in connection with indirect issuances. And if you couple that amendment with the rule that Carlo Galli mentioned at the very beginning of our chat, whereby if you have on lendings to in the context of indirect issuances to the Italian parent, and one of the requirements of the directive on interest and royalties has not met, i.e. beneficial ownership, and by just paying a 5% withholding tax, you can now, in my opinion, issue indirectly just by bearing that additional cost. So I think that for the future, clearly, Italian corporates would want to consider direct issuances, but if there are compelling reasons for not issuing directly, they now have also, I think, all the means to consider, without all the problems that the tax rules were generated before, the indirect issuances as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Vanya. So if I can turn now to we have Vittorio Salvadori from Freshfields.
Yes.
And my question for you, Vittorio, is so the so-called growth decree also removes tax obstacles to the issuance of project bonds. Can you explain a little bit more about that, please?
Yes, sure. Yeah, the changes contained in the growth decree and concerning project bonds are basically consistent with the changes that we have considered so far in respect to corporate bonds. In particular, the growth decree completes the legislation concerning the issuance of bonds by certain project companies. This legislation had already been redrafted at the beginning of 2012, without, however, fully addressing certain tax restrictions which made it difficult to issue those bonds. The purpose of the new rules is therefore to cancel those restrictions so to facilitate the issuance of project bonds, making these instruments and the Italian infrastructure market more attractive for potential investors, and ultimately foster the economy. It has to be noted, however, that the new tax rules will be applicable only for a limited period of time, and in particular to project bonds issued within 3 years from the entry into force of the growth decree, which occurred on 26th of June when the decree was published on the official gazette. So let's say this is a limit to the new rules on project bonds. The new rules apply to bonds issued by certain eligible project companies, which are listed under Article 157 of the Law on Public Contracts. Basically, those project companies are companies which have concessions for the construction and or management of an infrastructure or of a public utility service, companies authorized to build infrastructures for the transport of gas, or which operate gas storage facilities, companies which are authorized to build portions of the Italian electricity grid, and companies holding licenses for the construction and management of regasification terminals for liquefied natural gas. The first restriction, the first tax rule concerning the project bond is contained in the first paragraph of Article 1, which states that interest on those project bonds are subject to the same tax treatment applicable to public bonds. This means, therefore, that project bonds are subject to the regime under the Decree 239. The withholding tax rate, where applicable, is 12.5% and not the ordinary 20%, which generally applies to financial instruments different from public bonds. Whitelisted foreign investors are exempted from any Italian tax, subject to compliance with the ordinary procedure, which entails the deposit of the bonds with eligible financial intermediaries and the filing of the required documentation. And ultimately, if the project bonds are issued abroad, they should be treated like Republic of Italy securities, meaning that all foreign investors, and not only whitelisted foreign investors, should be tax exempted in Italy. The second part, so let's say the first paragraph deals with the withholding tax treatment of project bonds and makes them eligible for the Decree 239 regime. The second paragraph takes away the limits to the deductibility of interest occurring on project bonds, stating that the restriction which we discussed a few minutes ago concerning interest on bonds issued by unlisted entities do not apply to bonds issued by project companies, and therefore interest at the level of the project company will be deductible according to the ordinary rules, which means that interest is deductible within 30% of the EBITDA, and in excess is carried forward to the subsequent years and becomes deductible if and when there is sufficient EBITDA capacity. The third paragraph addresses the transfer taxes to the security package which assist the issue of project bonds, and rather than the various ad valorem, so proportional transfer taxes, it is stated that flat registration, mortgage and cadastral tax in the amount of euro 168 per tax shall apply. And those, let's say, those three provisions are the one which, for the time being, will only apply for a 3-year period. And then there is a final paragraph of Article 1 which contains a non-tax provision and states that project bonds can also be issued to refinance previous liabilities such as bridge financings incurred by the project company to finance the realization of the relevant infrastructure or the realization of the relevant public utility service. So all in all, the change to the tax regime of project bonds is positive. It should help to issue those kind of securities. The only limit is that the new rules will only apply for a 3 years period of time. And that's it.
Vittorio, thank you very much indeed. So if I can turn to Francesca Rangiuli from Linklaters. Francesca, I want to put it to you that the ongoing internationalization of the Chinese renminbi as a currency, combined with the recent reform of Italian tax legislation for bond issuances, create an additional opportunity for Italian companies to access that bond market. I wonder if you would agree with that, Francesca.
Absolutely, I agree, and actually we really hope that it will be in this route. The decree combined with the current credit crunch, so the current market condition, and the increasing importance of the renminbi currency, both as commercial currency for transaction and for as investment by itself, could trigger a sort of a big bang for dim sum issue for Italian companies. As you were mentioning, here the important thing is that renminbi currency is becoming an internationalization currency. This means that it can be used in financial transaction, but also in commercial transaction. China importance is becoming day by day. I mean, the economic growth of China I mean, we are all familiar with the idea that U.S. economy is the largest economy in the world, but China growth figures are impressive. We must think that in 2003, China's economy was only about 50% of the size of U.S. economy, while in 2011 it then grown to be about 46% of the size of U.S. economy. In 2010, it overtook Japan's economy, and it has become the second largest economy and a very important player for European countries, including Italy. In addition to this, we must think that the Chinese government is trying to promote the use of its currency. Settlement, as I was mentioning, settlement of cross-border transaction now can be carried out in renminbi in particular circumstances. China has also taken steps to expand the use of the currency overseas, establishing bilateral currency swap with 17 countries in order to make such currency more liquid. In addition to this, it is also very important the role of London and especially Hong Kong as a hub for offshore renminbi markets. For all these reasons, we have seen since July 2010 more than 70 renminbi issue on the market. Linklaters has been and is the market leader on this product. We have assisted very different issuer and arranging banks. There were transactions like Tesco, Mitsubishi, Alstom, Lloyds. We assisted entity as the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and in the course of 2012, we have assisted to the issue by the largest offshore renminbi issue by the Chinese Ministry of Finance of renminbi for 23 billion bonds. This was the first sovereign bonds. And last April, HSBC has listed a renminbi bond on the London Stock Exchange, the first time targeting retail investors. The question that can be raised here is about why Italy and Italian company should be interested to this market. There are several reasons. It makes sense for sure for Italian companies which have commercial relationship with Chinese entities and therefore have renminbi exposure, and in such way they will reduce the need to hedge the exchange movements. It makes sense for luxury company that have operating activities in China, and the repatriation of funds will eliminate the delay due to foreign currency conversion procedures. But it makes sense also for Italian companies that usually trade in third currency, let's say US dollar, which is costly for both trading partners. I have to say that also generally Italian companies that do not have a focus on, in particular on the Chinese market, could be interested in such market because Italian companies need money, need an alternative to bank financing, and it has been proved that financing costs in renminbi are very attractive and cheaper depending on market condition. In such scenario, so I would say that the growth decree has certainly helped in creating the circumstances to allow Italian companies to issue bonds directly from Italy. I'm not a tax expert, so I would leave, let's say, such the structure of the transaction to my colleagues, to tax consultant. But if I have to think to the easiest structure, I would say that if an Italian unlisted company would like to issue dim sum bonds, renminbi bonds in London, so it means listing such bond in a regulated market, London, Luxembourg, Ireland, targeting qualified investors resident in whitelisted country, I would say that such structure would allow benefit both for the unlisted company than for the investors that subscribe and are resident in whitelisted company. A final observation, I would say that anyone, any company, any financial institution, any corporate outside China may issue renminbi bond. There are no governmental approval whatsoever in the event the renminbi are held outside China. Any person that hold through intermediary renminbi account outside China may purchase such bond. The proceeds can be used for lawful purposes outside China, and the bond now can be cleared through the European clearing system. Again, the documentation that should be produced is very familiar to is similar to the documentation we are really familiar with, that is the Eurobond documentation. So I really think that this could be a new trend and a new renminbi issue probably will start in Italy shortly.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Francesca. So I'm conscious that we've run rather significantly over the time we initially allowed. I mean, we do have a couple of minutes if any of our legal experts have any follow-on points that they wish to bring up at this point. Okay, maybe that's probably wise if we wrap it up here. So I think it really remains for me to say to thank you very much to everyone for attending, and for all our contributors, to Bob and Luca Solano from Monte Italy, to Eric Brown from PIMCO, and to all our legal experts. Thank you very much for your time. As Bob referenced before, next year will be the 50th anniversary of the mechanics, of the original Eurobond mechanics. Now, to obtain tax exemption 49 years ago required going through the back door, but from what I've heard today, it looks like the Italian government has finally opened the front door to allow investors around the world to invest in Italian debt without fear of exposure to unwarranted tax. I mean, we've heard through the grapevine that similar efforts are underway in other countries other than Italy, including Russia and some of the CIS states, for example. So it's an exciting world in which we live, and we look forward to working with some of you further. I invite you, of course, to reach out to all the legal experts, the lawyers on this panel, or ourselves, if you want to explore any of these matters in more detail. So once again, thank you for joining, and of course for everyone present from the United States, I'd like to wish a happy Independence Day to Eric in particular. And thank you for joining, and goodbye.